Okay, so we're looking at lab 9.2, which is it's called a walking one finite state machine. So what a walking one is it's just where you're going to have one signal asserted at any given time. And so if you looked at something like, let's say you looked at a bunch of signals. Let's say you had 4 signals, like 3, 2, 1, 0, and they were all sitting at zeros. A walking one means that one will assert at any given time. So let's say that this guy went high and then it went down. And then this guy went high and then it went down. Then this guy went high and this one went down. And this one went high and this one went down. And so in this way, it's a very popular pattern to test continuity in things. So if you build up a system, one of the first things to do, you have 100 signals going left, 100 signals going right. You want to just make sure everybody's connected. So one of the things that you'll do is send out a walking one pattern, and you'll see if that one got through to all the other, basically where it was going. The reason it's powerful is because if you have an open circuit, obviously it won't assert. And it would be very obvious that it didn't assert because you'd have a walk, no walk, 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 and it's really obvious. The other thing that makes obvious is that if you have a short circuit. So if you had a short circuit, you might get something where this guy went up too, and then you're like, okay, so we have a serious problem here. These two signals are shorted together. So it's just a very popular pattern to do things to test out hardware once you get it. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a finite state machine to do one of these patterns, and the pattern is going to be displayed on what? It's going to be displayed on the LEDs, okay? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to have kind of this scaling of complexity of the finite state machines, but let's start off with just the very first walking one, okay? All right, so we are going to start by putting it on the red LEDs of the DE0 CV. Okay? Now, if you look at what that means, this is what it would look like if you had these red LEDs walk. Okay, so you just see one blip, 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 blip. And if it was going the other way, it would go blip, 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 blip. Okay? When we do this, it's pretty cool, but how are we going to get it to actually go? Okay, we don't want to be touching it. We don't want to be pressing a button to get it to walk. We're actually going to clock it. So what we want to do is we want to have a clock that says, okay, clock, and it'll go to a pattern, light an LED. Then clock, then it'll light the next LED. And then clock, and it'll light the next LED. Clock, it'll light the next LED. The reason you need a finite state machine to do this is because you need to know which LED to light next. Because if you're in this state, you need to know that because you need to light this guy next. Okay? So the fact that it's synchronous to a clock and the fact that you need to know where you've been to know where you're going necessitate a finite state machine. Okay? Now, when you think about this, the way to kind of architect it is you have 10 basic states right here. Okay? Or, yeah, 10 states. So what you're going to do is you're going to build a finite state machine that has 10 states in it. Now, this used to be almost impossible when you would do this with pen and paper. Okay, because you'd have to have K-maps and you'd have all sorts of flip-flops going every which way. But in VHDL, all you do is code it up and let the synthesizer take care of all the circuits that you need. Okay? To make this a little more interesting for you, we will have an input into the finite state machine in the form of the dip switch, switch 0, and it will tell you which way you're going to go. Okay? So, not that big of a deal. If you look at the kind of the or the block diagram of this, you are going to have a walking one finite state machine. You're going to model it with 3 processes. Okay? The state memory is just going to be just like you've done before. State memory is a process. Your next state logic is going to be a combinational logic process, and then your output logic is going to be a combinational logic process. What's the input into the system? It is a single input called direction that comes from switch 0. What is the output? The output is actually going to be 10 bits. It is going to be each bit that drives the red LEDs on the DE0 CV. And if you look at the picture of it, we're talking about these LEDs right here. So it's just going to go, and then if you flip it, the switch, it'll go back the other way. Okay? All right, so it feels pretty good. The neat thing about that output is it's a vector, right? So you can make the vector LEDR 10 bits wide, and then you assign to it in one signal assignment. Okay, so it's just like 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0. Okay, so it's a pretty simple signal assignment. So we get a little practice doing that, right? Except there's one trick. We want to be able to see the LEDs moving. And we have a clock that comes into our DE0CV board that's 50 megahertz. And if we have this finite state machine increment between states every rising edge of a clock, it'll be going 50 megahertz, 50 million state transitions per second. And we won't be able to see it. Okay? So we finally get to the point where we're going to start needing to slow down the clock. Okay? We're going to slow this puppy down. Now, here is one potential way to do that. Okay? We want something that is going to take in a clock that is 50 megahertz. Okay? All right? And it's just hammering. Okay? Hammering. Well, what would happen if you attach that to a toggle flop? Okay, this might sound familiar. You take this signal and you put it into the clock of a D flip-flop, where you take the output inversion and feed it back into here. Let's just say that that goes right there. What is this guy going to look like right here? It's going to look like half of it. So it's going to look like 25 megahertz. Okay, so it's going to be doing all sorts of stuff like this. It's going to be like, where would it transition? It's going to be 25 megahertz. And if you do that again, you'll get 12.5 megahertz. And if you do that again, you'll get 6 point whatever. You start dividing down the clock until you get to a frequency that you can drive your finite state machine at a rate that you can see with the human eye. Sound good? Okay. You have already created this. Okay, you have already created this system to divide down the clock in the form of a ripple counter. Okay? So what you're going to do in this lab is you are going to make a new component. Actually, no, you don't even need to do that. You don't even do that in this one. You are going to take your 38-bit ripple counter, okay, that you've already done. Do you remember doing this? You've already got this ripple counter in here, and you're just going to pluck off one of the slower bits. And when you do that, you can actually use that to drive the clock of the finite state machine. So at this point, you're going to have two different clocks. You're going to have the input clock, which is called clock underscore 50 or 50 megahertz clock. And then you're going to use that to drive this big old ripple counter. And then you're just going to pluck off one of the bits and go ahead and toss that as the clock into your finite state machine. You don't need to do anything else with the bits of the ripple counter. You're just going to pick off one to make sure that you can actually see the LEDs move. Sound good? So if you think about this, all you're going to do is copy lab 9.1, which was the ripple counter. Is that true? And then you're going to add in the finite state machine. Your outputs will drive LEDR. And then while we're there, let's just see if we can see the cool walking one pattern on the analog discovery logic analyzer. So what we're going to do is we'll take those same 10 bits and we'll run them over to the GPIO underscore 1 header, and we'll hook up our analog discovery. And this time we're going to use 10 channels. So we'll actually hook up a couple extra channels from D0 to D9, and we'll take a measurement of the walking one pattern. Now remember, when you take this switch and you flip switch 0 back and forth, it should change the direction of the walking one pattern. So you're going to have the logic in there for your next state logic in order to handle looking at that input and actually changing where you go across the states. Does that make sense? Okay, how's that feeling? Nice. All right. So let's see here. We're going to add this. You're going to take a video of it as your deliverable. Then you're going to take a walking one pattern. This is what it'll look like. You're going to see these nice ones cruise across there. You're going to take a screenshot of that, and then you're going to upload your top.bhd as the deliverable. How's that sound? Okay, so that is lab 9.2.